Thank you so much for joining us. This is the first in our new quarterly Seeklight training webinar series, and today we'll be discussing JSTOR Seeklight and accessibility. Future sessions will cover an end-to-end overview of Seeklight, publishing and preservations, and other applications of Seeklight. So if there's topics that you're particularly interested in, please let us know. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel, and the link to the recording will be sent to all registrants by email as well. In the chat, we are sharing a handout that accompanies this webinar and includes additional resources. And there will also be a link to that handout in the post-webinar email as well. My name is Remus Jackson, and I am an Education Services Lead here at Ithaca. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Elizabeth Behrens, who is also an Education Services Lead, and our Accessibility Lead, Matt Harris, who will be helping with the Q&A. After you exit the webinar today, you'll be taken to a brief survey. And we'd really appreciate hearing your thoughts about how useful this was. And I want to emphasize that, how helpful it is, especially since this is brand new, this series. So I will be taking your feedback into account to continue to improve these. And here is our agenda for today. We'll be focusing on specific applications of JSTOR Seeklight that support making your images more accessible. We'll spend some time in the stewardship site, as well as look at some examples of displaying items accessibly on JSTOR. I'm using JSTOR as our example, but I want to emphasize the techniques that we're covering are applicable whether you publish to JSTOR or use a different site for displaying your collections. I will also briefly introduce WCAG or WCAG and how it connects to what we're covering, and go over some things to consider as you work with your Seeklight generated materials. We should also have about 15 minutes for a Q&A at the end, but feel free to ask questions as you think of them. You can ask questions through the chat, or there's a dedicated Q&A button in Zoom that you can use. Either way is fine. Questions you ask in the chat will be seen by everyone attending, while questions you ask through the Q&A button will only be visible to Elizabeth, Matt, and myself. And we'll be updating the handout we shared with questions and answers after the webinar as well. And that is all of our housekeeping. So we're all going to turn off our cameras so you can see my screen better. And we're going to get started. And we're going to start with a brief introduction to WCAG. I'm sure some of you are familiar, but I want to be sure that we're all working from the same pool of knowledge for this webinar. So WCAG WCAG stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. They are published by the World Wide Web Consortium, and they are a set of recommendations designed to increase the accessibility of the web. And I do mean the web, like the whole internet when I say that. WCAG is the main standard for web accessibility internationally. The recommendations are broken down into specific guidelines, as you might imagine, and each guideline presents a goal to make web content more accessible. So for example, provide text alternatives for non-text content. Each guideline then has specific success criteria, which explain how you can meet that goal. So for providing text alternatives, one of those success criteria is all non-text content has a text alternative. And then how you do that is by providing bold text for images and long description for complex images, which we'll be talking about today. You don't need to memorize the success criteria by any means, but it is helpful to be aware of, I think, especially if your institution is required to comply with the ADA Title II ruling or another accessibility law that cites WCAG. So I will be mentioning the specific success criteria that are relevant to what we discussed today, but contextualizing them for the archival, distinctive, and special collections content that y'all have specifically. All right. And we're going to start with that first example of all non-text content has to have a text alternative, which comes from success criteria 1.1.1. And this is because images are not, by default, an accessible medium. They aren't able to be read by a computer. So assistive technology doesn't really know what's in an image, right? In most cases, they can't really be adjusted. You might be able to zoom in, but it'll depend on the size of the image, the type of display you're using, and you can't really easily change the contrast of an image or the colors of an image, right? And some people have poor internet connectivity or in poor internet environments where images may not load, or they might have to have images turned off for various reasons. And I flag all of that because when we talk about image accessibility, we often think about it in exclusively the context of screen readers, which are important. That is an important part of it, but it's not the only reason, right, that images can be an accessibility barrier for folks. So to make images accessible, you provide a text alternative. Text is hands down the most accessible medium for the internet, I should say, because it can be transformed in any way someone needs it to be. It can be read aloud if someone can't see it on the page. You can zoom in on it and resize it. There's tools like browser extensions that let you change the styling if you need the font to be different, if you need the spacing between letters or lines to be different. So it's really flexible in a way that an image is not. So anytime you have an image, you know that you'll need a text alternative for that image that provides the equivalent meaning. And we're going to be working with this image of this nice building today for the alt text portion of this. The most common text alternative for images is alt text, which is a short description of the image that serves the same purpose and provides the same information. This makes it contextual. The purpose and information the image provides depends on how and why the image is being presented. All images in your collections that you are making available online need to have alt text to be accessible. And the goal for this is to ensure that someone who can't perceive that image is getting the same information who can, and also understands why the image is there. This also means that when you think about alt text, you should think about where and how your collections are being used, whether that's research, teaching, a particular exhibit, or another sort of specific presentation of images. And I want to call out that your descriptive metadata, in addition to the alt text, is helpful here, right? And we'll talk a bit about that as well. Now, the alt text feature isn't available yet, so I'll be showing a prototype that our wonderful design team has shared. I know some of you also gave feedback to our user insights team on an earlier iteration of this design as well, so it might look a little familiar. And I want to say it is a little unusual for us to demo something in development like this during a webinar, but we wanted to do this in the spirit of the charter program and letting you kind of have see how the tool is being built in collaboration with your feedback. And my hope is that this will help you get a sense of how you will be able to use this feature while also providing some guidance you can apply to manual alt text creation along the way. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to the prototype. There we go. Great. And now, because this is a design prototype, and I'll go ahead and full screen this as well so you can see it better. There might be some small differences when this is actually implemented in stewardship, but more or less this will be what the workflow is for you. So here we have a prototype of the Seeklight upload page, which should hopefully look pretty familiar. And underneath this header that says additional processing, there is a checkbox that says create alt text for uploaded images in addition to the existing create transcripts for written documents. So if I have this checked and I click upload, similar to transcripts, Seeklight would create alt text for any images in that upload. You'll also be able to generate alt text directly from the item page, so I'll go ahead and switch to that. Okay, so here's the item page prototype for this image that we saw earlier. I have that Seeklight generated metadata. This is real generated metadata. And if I scroll down underneath this image viewer, there's a tab that says alt text here. I'll go ahead and open the menu from these three vertical dots and click generate alt text. So again, this is a prototype, but this is real alt text that Seeklight generated for this image. And there's a couple of specific features that we're adding for this alt text that I want to call out as well. First, under the alt text here, you'll see one uncertainty reason listed. Seeklight will flag details that might be unclear in your image, such as illegible text or partially visible details. The idea here is that when you are reviewing and editing your generated alt text, this can help fill in details that Seeklight might be able to pick up. So you could look at that and decide if that's critical to the image's meaning and you want to add that clarity. Or, you might look at it and go, okay, I don't really, this isn't something that's super relevant to this alt text. It's okay that Seeklight couldn't pick this up. Second, next to uncertainty reasons, there is text that says no people flagged. Seeklight will flag if it detects people in your image. And by that, I mean just the presence of people if they are there or not. This is unrelated to anything like facial recognition technology. The reason for this is that we know describing images of people can be tricky, especially when an AI tool is involved, because we do not want the tool to be making false or potentially harmful assumptions about people, right? And we have prompted Seeklight to not speculate about people's sensitive characteristics or include that information, generally speaking, unless it's visually unambiguous and contextually essential, both of those things. That said, I will tell you from an accessibility point of view, it is a best practice to describe how people look in neutral, objective language in alt text when it is relevant to the image's meaning. And in a lot of cases, how people look is relevant to an image's meaning. But we do recognize that different institutions may have different policies in place for handling images of people, and your approach may also need to vary by collection, right? So the flag just alerts you that people have been detected, so you can evaluate Seeklight's output and decide how you want to handle these types of images yourself. In this case, though, it's just an image of a building, so nothing is flagged. You'll be able to edit this alt text directly in Stewardship. So if I click into this, it'll apply a little edit that we can pretend I did for real. And the uncertainty reasons that were listed before have been replaced by the word edited. So I know this alt text has been edited, very similar to how your metadata works when you edit that. I would save this editing, or if I had my own pre-existing alt text that I wanted to add manually to this image, I could do that as well by going up and clicking save. So again, very similar to how you edit your metadata. And I'll also call out that I would also be able to revert back to that generated alt text or clear it out entirely, very similar again to how transcripts already work. Now I'm going to switch back to my slides. There we go. Briefly, I want to highlight how we have instructed Seeklight to generate alt text. We did multiple rounds of quality evaluation and drew from a wide range of guidelines for manual and AI alt text generation. And I know at this past week's charter meeting, we also invited some of y'all to participate in another round of evaluation of Seeklight alt text. So we really are continuing to work on it and improve it. The alt text that Seeklight provides is designed for a general research use case, which is appropriate for publishing to JSTOR or another online display platform. Seeklight will begin with the most important information that it identifies in the image, the main subject and action, and then add meaningful details that support the important information. And you can see how it did this with this particular image. It begins by describing the building itself, and then starts to add more detail about the building, and then finally ends with some detail about what's in the foreground, right? So beginning with that most prominent information and then working towards supporting detail. If your image contains text, Seeklight will include only the most prominent text in that alt text, so a title or headline, for example, and that is appropriate for alt text. If there is a lot of text in an image that needs to be transcribed for someone, that is when you'd want to have a transcript to go with it, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And finally, Seeklight will not infer or speculate on the meaning of your images. Now, once you have generated your alt text, you'll be able to review and edit it, of course, like I demonstrated. And there's some things I want to recommend considering when you are planning to review and edit this Seeklight generated alt text. The first is your approach to images of people. I mentioned that Seeklight will flag those for you. If you don't already have existing guidelines or policies in place for how you want to handle images of people, I would recommend implementing those, documenting them, and then regardless of how you choose to handle these images, make sure that you're doing that consistently across your collection or collections, whichever the case might be. That's why I would recommend documenting some sort of policy or guidelines, because it'll kind of help you keep consistent. The context of your images is also important. So whether you're publishing to JSTOR or using in something more specific, like an exhibit or a particular class, as I mentioned, Seeklight's alt text is geared towards a more general use case like display on JSTOR, and it might need to be adjusted if you're doing something more specific than that. And finally, redundancy with your other metadata. It's important for the alt text to not just be verbatim repeating information that is elsewhere on that page, right? So in particular, I would recommend looking at title and description for that kind of redundancy. We want these elements to be working together to enhance the person's understanding of the image, right? Now, Seeklight generated alt text will be publishable to JSTOR, and on JSTOR, it will be associated with the image itself, right? And we are also planning to implement a button in the image viewer that'll allow any user, whether they're using a screen reader or not, to view the alt text for that image. If you want to take your alt text to other platforms, you're of course welcome to do so. I want to call out that if you do that, the alt text should be associated with the image itself. And this means that it's not necessarily visible on the page, but rather if someone is using assistive technology like a screen reader to focus on that image, the alt text will be announced out loud, right? So we kind of want alt text to always be associated with the image directly. You might need to look into your platform's documentation to learn how to set up alt text for your images if that's not something you're already doing. And finally, if your platform does not support associating the alt text directly with the image, I know, many of us rely on third-party platforms. We don't have a huge say in what they offer. You can provide it outside of the image as a caption or a clearly labeled field. However, I just want to be really clear that that is technically not a correct use of alt text, right? It's just better than nothing. Now, with that, I would like to talk about what we need for another type of image, which is images of text. An image of text is what it sounds like. It is text that is being presented in an image format, like a TIFF file scan of a document or handwritten letter, or a screenshot of a web page. And I have an example on this slide, this scanned circular from the 1980s. This is a physical text object, but the text itself is being presented as like a JPEG, right? So there's no way for a computer to read the text that is inside this image. Now, per WCAG, you should never present text as an image unless the presentation of that text is critical to the text's meaning and purpose, which is what we're going to find in the archival context, right? Almost always the visual presentation of the text, its materiality, how it's been preserved, that's part of the meaning of the item, right? And we don't want to take that away. So what we need is an accessible text alternative that gives someone all of the text in the image. And typically, that'll be a transcript that is presented adjacent to the image, either as a link to that text transcript or the full text transcript itself. And this is something we can do with Seeklight. There are two ways to generate a transcript with JSTOR Seeklight. First, when you're uploading your items to Seeklight, you can check the Create Transcripts for Items with Text box. And I have a screenshot of that, of what it looks like currently. When checked, Seeklight will automatically generate transcripts for any items with text in your upload, regardless of the file type. We generally recommend checking this every time. It's just a good thing to do, right? Alternatively, you can generate transcripts directly from the item page in Stewardship. And I have another screenshot showing how that looks. So on the transcript tab of any items, you'll click that Generate Transcripts button, and it'll generate that transcript for you. So this means you can generate transcripts for items whether you have uploaded them for Seeklight or not, or if you don't check that box, when you do the upload, you can go back and generate afterwards. So if you do have items where you don't need or want that Seeklight generated metadata, you can still add them to Stewardship and generate the transcript. And you can also generate transcripts for items that you uploaded, in existing collections that you have, or that you started before upgrading to Stewardship Tier 3. Do note, though, that if the item hasn't been processed by Seeklight already, generating the transcript will count towards your item allowance. Now, I'm going to go ahead and switch into Stewardship and show you what this looks like. Let me get out of this tab. And I'm going to zoom in a tiny bit because I know it's a little hard to see on my screen. All right. So I'm on the metadata records table of my project. I have an item here, and I'm going to go ahead and open this item up, and then I'm going to select that transcript tab. I've already generated a transcript for this item, which you can see to the left side of the item viewer. So they're presented side by side. This transcript is searchable on this page, which I think is nice if you are working with a really long document, right? And I can also edit this transcript right in Stewardship by clicking Edit. The editor is pretty lightweight. There's some formatting options, so I can bold or underline text, for instance, and there is a line break option as well. Seeklight will automatically include line breaks in the generated transcript, but if you have existing transcripts that you want to upload into Stewardship for your items, you could do that and then manually add page breaks if needed with this tool. And of course, I can also review this text for accuracy with the item right here and make sure it all matches the way I want it to. So I'm going to go ahead and do a tiny bit of editing. I'm going to bold this title here to match the item. I'm also going to underline, I see 1980 is underlined in this item if I zoom in a little bit. So I'm going to underline it here. And then at the very bottom of this item, I happen to notice that, here, let me zoom out a tiny bit so you can see Seeklight transcribed. There's some really tiny text underneath the New York Public Library in the bottom corner, and Seeklight transcribed that. This might be accurate for all I know, but I actually can't zoom in enough to verify that, and I don't have any other documents I can use to verify that. So I think I'll go ahead and clear this out and instead make a notation that that text is illegible. And again, Seeklight very well could be correct, and I could probably verify that if I had access to other documents that have the same sort of stamp on them. But since I can't verify it and it's not text that is critical to understanding this item, I'd rather just sort of make that notation, which feels a little more accurate to the materiality of the item. You can download your transcripts as text files or rich text files. So if I scroll up and select download, I have those two options. Rich text files will preserve any formatting like bolding. So if I wanted to save this underline and bolding, I would choose rich text. Text files won't do that. And these are both accessible file formats. Right now, the transcripts can't be published directly to JSTOR. That is something we're working on, but in the interim, I'm going to show you a couple of methods you can use whether you are publishing to JSTOR or, again, displaying on another platform. So first, I have this item published to JSTOR. And what I've done in this case for this version of the item is in the description field. I'll zoom in a tiny bit. I have put a link to the transcript that will take anyone who clicks it to that full text transcript. I also want to call out that you'll notice I've formatted this link accessibly, so it's not just a naked URL, right? It says exactly what it is, so someone knows where it will take them if they click it. And it also notes that it'll open in a new tab, so no one is surprised by that behavior when they click this link. So if you have the ability to host files on your institution server, you have a file sharing service you already use, or if you do display transcripts on another platform that you're also displaying these item records on, linking is a really good option. And here's another option I'll show you. So same item, also published to JSTOR. I just sort of duplicated this record for the purpose of this presentation. And in the description field, since this is pretty short, it's just one page, I went ahead and put the full text transcript into the description. And if I click show more, you'll be able to see the full text. This would definitely works best if the text is fuller. And, you see the JSTOR did automatically sort of shorten it and put a show more link so it didn't take up the whole page. But you can imagine if this was many, many pages, it would be a little tedious to scroll through to try to get to your other metadata, right? In both cases, I chose the description field since, as you all know, right now you can't add custom fields to those Seeklight compatible projects, and I wanted to highlight how to work with those. But if you are working with a non-Seeklight compatible project, you could add a custom field for transcripts, or again, if you're displaying on another platform and you have the ability to add metadata fields like this, you could create a field for transcript and display it that way. Now, as I mentioned, we are planning to enable transcripts to be published to JSTOR directly in the future. Work on that is in early stages, but my understanding that I can say now is that the transcripts will appear in the item viewer. So the user will have the item and then that text transcript right there with the item on JSTOR. Given that, you might not want to have redundancy with the full text transcript also in your metadata or link or anything like that. And I want to show you how I've set up these transcripts in Stewardship and how you can very quickly batch edit them to remove any of that transcript data once the transcripts are directly publishable. Because what I'm not interested in doing is giving you like a workaround that requires you to do a bunch of redundant work for no reason, right? So I'm going to go back to this item in Stewardship. I'm going to go to the metadata. And in the description field, I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see it better. Make this smaller. What I have done, and this is the linked version, is I have put a pipe mark before that hyperlink and after it. And I did the same thing for the version where I put the full text transcript. I put a pipe before the start of the transcript and after it. On JSTOR, when you do this, it creates a nice line break. So that's why, for instance, here we have this sort of break between the regular description and that transcript, and same with this link. So it doesn't look weird to the user or anything. And then I can take advantage of find and replace in Excel to batch edit because of this. So let's say I have hundreds of records or even thousands of records that have transcripts set up like this, and I want to get rid of them. I'll go ahead and open up in Excel a demo spreadsheet, and we have instructions in that handout that Elizabeth shared for how to export your metadata records to Excel for editing like this. You can also use any other spreadsheet software that supports Excel files and also has a find and replace functionality. What I'm going to do, I have my spreadsheet, I have my records. I'm going to select this description column, and you'll see, hopefully you can see a little bit, the link text is different in all of these, right? And then there's some that have a full text transcript, so the text is not exactly the same. And I'm going to click Find and Select and hit Replace. And then in Find, I'm going to type a pipe mark, an asterisk, and a pipe mark, and I'm going to leave Replace with blank. And then I'm going to select Replace All. And what that's going to do is clear out any pipe marks with text between them in all of these description fields. And then all I would have to do is save the sheet, go back to Stewardship, re-upload it, and all of those records would be edited simultaneously. Alrighty, so I'm going to return to my slides. Go ahead and there we go. And there's a couple of things I want to touch on with transcripts as you start to consider what you need for your items to be fully accessible. And the first is alt text. Do you also need alt text for images of text? The answer is, it depends on how you are displaying that image of text to someone who is using it. If when a person goes to that item online, whether on JSTOR or another platform, it is presented as an image, so that's a JPEG, a PNG, a TIFF file, any image file type, then yes, you do also need alt text, right? Because there's still going to be an image on that page that the screen reader is not going to know what it is. You don't need the alt text to be detailed or descriptive. It should just note what the item is and where that text alternative is, and it can be located, right? So the idea there is someone, comes to that page, they can't see the image, they hear, oh, this is a letter, the transcript of the letter is in the description field, they know where to go to get that transcript, right? If, however, you are presenting it as a document, so likely a PDF, then no, you wouldn't have alt text for the PDF file itself, right? But on that note, something I get asked about often is the relationship between Seeklight's transcripts and OCR. So let's talk about that. Transcripts, like what Seeklight provides, are a text alternative. They are something that is presented outside of, separately from the image, right? OCR is a process that makes text in an image machine readable. So it is one method you can use to create a transcript. It's not the only method, but it is a method, right? And a PDF, on the other hand, is a file type that presents images of text. The purpose of a PDF is to preserve the visual formatting of text. So whether you are looking at it, regardless of what device you're looking at it on, what type of operating system you use, etc., the visual formatting of that text is preserved. That means that it is capturing that text as an image. When OCR is applied to a PDF, it becomes machine readable. So PDFs are really a weird hybrid file type, which is why they have their own special considerations for accessibility that are, kind of outside the scope of this webinar. That said, if you have PDF documents that are already accessible, and by that I mean they've been OCR'd, you've done the tagging and the correct structure, everything you need to make it accessible, you do not need a transcript also, because the PDF itself is accessible to start, right? However, I will say that I do personally still recommend generating and providing that text transcript regardless. Because when we say accessible PDF, what we mean is that someone who's using a screen reader can read that text. And that's important. But all of the other stuff that I highlighted about text earlier, the way you can kind of transform how it looks. So, if you're not a screen reader user, but you have dyslexia or vision issues or, any reason you might need to modify how text looks, you can't actually do that with a PDF, even when it is machine readable, right? Because the point is that it's kind of locked into that particular format. So while it's not a requirement for accessibility, providing a text transcript with a PDF does increase the accessibility of your items overall. So if you can generate them anyway, I say generate them anyway. Now, in some cases, you might have items that are both images and text. So things like maps, charts, infographics, posters. There's all kinds of items like this, right? And you might also have images that don't have text on them, but are still too complex to condense into one or two sentences, like a lot of art images are like this. We typically call these complex images. And complex images need more than alt text to be accessible. Remember, the goal is to give someone who can't perceive that image for whatever reason the same information as someone who can perceive that image. So another way to think about it is that you're helping someone build a mental model of the image. And this is where, let me go back. This is where I want to introduce what WCAG calls a long description. A long description is pretty much any additional information about the image that you need to convey that equivalent meaning, which means that a transcript can be a long description in many cases, right? And it also means that there's a third thing Seeklight generates that I've kind of mentioned that we can think of as a way to improve accessibility, and that is your item level descriptive metadata. Your item level metadata provides really useful information to someone trying to understand an image's content and purpose. And there is also always an option to do sort of a longer form visual description of the image. That might be appropriate in some cases, particularly with things like art images. And I'll kind of show you an example of that, but I want to emphasize, how transcripts and item metadata kind of work with the alt text in these cases. And I'm going to walk through a complex image to show you what I mean. So I have this cool poster here on the slide. It's kind of borderline a complex image versus just an image of text, but this is where context is really important. If I were, say, posting this flyer to Instagram for an event, the meaningful info someone would need would just be the text. And that's why I kind of have these questions on here about context, right? Like, why is someone using it? And this is not an event that's happening now, right? This is an archival object. So if I'm looking at it on JSTOR, I'm probably not trying to pull up to the event. I'm interested in the poster in an archival context. So maybe I'm doing a project on 1980s poster design, or maybe I'm studying the history of New York City's hip hop scene, or any number of reasons why. I'm sure I don't have to tell you that a poster like this is really interesting to researchers, right? And in a lot of those cases, the visuals of the poster are going to be important in addition to the text. So I have an inkling I'm going to need alt text. I know I will need a transcript of all the text in the image, that item level metadata, and maybe an image description, a lengthier image description, depending on the context. And I'm going to show you how I have set up this item on JSTOR. So I have this item on JSTOR. This is how it looks. I've published it as an image. Since it's a illustrated poster. And so I know I'll need alt text. Now I can't show you what the Seeklight alt text looks like on this page because alt text is heard, right? So I will show you that alt text in a second. But first, I want to show you kind of how I've handled this metadata. So again, in the description field, I have the Seeklight generated description that includes some information about what's on the poster, what it is, what it's doing. And I have added at the bottom here a link to the accessible text transcript. So there's a full transcript as well. And then just to kind of show you what longer image description could look like, I also wrote out manually a longer image description here, focusing more on those visual details, which might be appropriate if, I was, for instance, using this in a collection about poster design or something like that. And now I'm going to switch back to my slides so we can kind of look at the Seeklight alt text with this other metadata together. Okay, so this is the original alt text that Seeklight generated for this image. Again, this is really what Seeklight generated. You can see that it's really focused on the text in this image, so it kind of correctly identified that it's a poster advertising an event. The text would be the most important. However, I know that I have a transcript for this text, and this, the headline and the artists are also listed in that description that Seeklight generated. So for this particular alt text, I don't really want that to be the focus because that would just be repetitive. So instead, I made some edits to this to prioritize at a high level that visual information. So I have the description from Seeklight here that, again, does list out the artists. I know that I have the transcript that has all of the text in that image if someone needs it. And then if it was appropriate, I could also include this longer image description that provides much more detail than the alt text. And the nice thing about doing it this way, where the information is sort of spread out, is, again, you're helping someone build a mental model, and you're also giving them control over how much they want to actually interact with this item, right? So maybe they aren't actually super interested in the visual details, so all they really need is the description and the alt text, and then they can choose to read that image description if they want to, right? Instead of sort of forcing them to have all of that information at once. So as you think about what you need for your items, I have a couple of questions that you can consider. And the first is, what types of images do you actually have? You might have collections that are all complex images, a specific type of complex image, even like a map collection, or you might have all images of text, right? Depending on how you're digitizing your items. Or you might have collections with images of people or sensitive materials that you want to kind of approach carefully. These are good things to kind of know going in, right? So you can strategize. The other things to think about are what collections those images are actually in. This will inform what details are important. Posters in a collection about poster design will probably need more of their visuals described than posters in a collection about campus life, right? And then finally, how are you displaying these images? And by that, I mean, what platform are you using? Are you using JSTOR, another platform? Are they open to the public, or are they kind of locked down to institutional stakeholders or researchers that are coming in with a certain level of existing knowledge and context? And also, again, thinking about use cases. So maybe you are putting together an exhibit, which would require a little more specificity, right, than a more general use case. And then for all of your images, you will need that alt text, right? So we want to make sure that we generate it. We want to check it, that it's matching the context of that image. You might also want to think about how you can adapt that alt text that Seeklight generates. Again, I know some folks have instructors come to them and ask them for images for a specific class. So you might want to have some guidance for the instructor on how to adapt things like that. For images of text, we definitely need those transcripts. We want to review them for accuracy and completeness primarily. And then we want to present them in an accessible format, whether that's on the web page itself or as an accessible file format. And for complex images, you'll need a combination of these. Of course, that item level metadata will be helpful for all of your items, right? It's really critical. But it's super critical for complex images where the extra description is needed to convey that equivalent meaning to someone. And with that, we have a good amount of time for Q&A. And I will go ahead and ask us to turn our cameras back on.
Thanks, Remus. I first wanted to ask you if you could share the link to the handout to everyone because there's something with the Zoom settings where I'm not able to do that right now. I apologize. So
No
if
worries.
anyone is looking for it, it's because I wasn't able to share it yet.
No worries. Thank you for letting me know. I have shared it with everyone.
Perfect. Thank you. We do have a question asking for some clarification. I wonder if you could elaborate a bit on why alt text is necessary if you do have description in the metadata.
Yeah, absolutely. So alt text serves a very specific purpose. That's why I was mentioning that it's associated with the image, right? Because when someone who is using assistive technology arrives at that image, if there is no alt text, it usually just announces the file name, right? Which is not very helpful to them to understand what the image actually is and why it's there and stuff like that. So your description serves a slightly different purpose than the alt text. So that's why I was kind of emphasizing you want to think about those together, and you always want that alt text to be, if possible, associated directly with the image file. Matt, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add to that.
Nope, that was pretty much what I had down. There's a kind of technical reason. The images themselves have to have a accessible name generated by that alt text. And while the description does exist on the page, it's in a separate section in that metadata section, and there's a bit of a cognitive load leap to get to the actual image that's in the viewer. And there's no way currently to programmatically, that's a jargon word, I guess, to associate that description to the image itself. And so having that alternative text is the direct way to say that this is the image and the textual description of that image versus the description, which may be more context setting, for example.
Great, thank you, Matt.
Can you clarify whether the generative transcript is available now or if it's coming soon?
Yeah, so transcripts are available. You can, when you're uploading your images, you should see that checkbox to generate transcripts, or again, you can generate them from the item page directly. The alt text functionality is the only thing that isn't released yet.
And there are a couple questions that have just come in about a timeline estimate on when the alt text is going to be available.
Yeah. So I can't give you an exact date yet. I know that, this thing we'll keep communicating about in the charter meetings. It is actively being worked on right now, in addition to that next wave of evaluations that we're doing for the Seeklight generation portion of it. We're currently working on building it out in the back end so that, it'll be associated with the image file and everything. So I can't give you something more specific than that, sorry, but it is actively happening. And then I do see Colleen's or the second question about adding alt text. So like I just said, right now it's not possible. In the interim, you could use the same trick I showed with transcripts to put it in the description, but I would actually, for that one, I would probably advise waiting since we are really close to kind of getting it out the door.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any other questions yet. But we have plenty of time if other questions come up and anyone wants to type them in.
Yeah.
Can you confirm if all of the media viewers are WCAG accessible?
Matt, you maybe want to talk about our current or image viewers on JSTOR?
Yes, they are. They all have the controls have accessible names. The only thing that will be updated shortly, we're making a big push to get to the April deadline, which is in about a week, 10 days, to ensure that the image description, and I saw the other message there about is the alt text appear in the HTML, that any alternative text that does get added to that alt text field will be associated directly in the HTML with that image within the viewer itself. But yes, the image viewers are accessible per WCAG, and all the parts of that image viewer will be having accessible names and the ability to navigate through them. And then, yeah, if you see the image on JSTOR itself, yeah, it'll be part of in some situations, it'll be a part of the image alt attribute. On the image viewer itself, it's a bit of a different process, and it's technically a canvas element that will have an ARIA label that will have the accessible name there.
There's a question about at some point, will we be able to add alt text to items already published to JSTOR?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The answer is yes. So when we do release the alt text functionality, you will have the ability to manually add alt text in addition to generating it with Seeklight. So similar to how you can add transcripts to existing items, you'll be able to generate that alt text directly on that item page retroactively. Or again, if you have existing alt text for items, because I am sure many of you do, you'll be able to manually add that alt text to items that are already in stewardship as well. You'll just need to republish to have them the alt text actually show up on JSTOR, similar to if you edit metadata, you have to republish it.
This is an interesting question. Am I able to provide context of the image into the alt text generation to refine the output?
That's a really good question. I believe, and I will double check this and we'll put it in the handout, but I believe the content, when you are uploading images, whatever context that you provide at the point of upload, like for the metadata will be also used for that alt text. I am not sure if there will be an option to add context at the item level if you were generating it at the item level retroactively. I know that is something that we were considering in some designs, but I'm not sure where we have landed with that. So I will follow up on it for you.
A question about exporting alt text items. Can you have that information appear in its own column or just export the items that have alt text?
Yeah, another really good question. I know we are talking about what the export experience will look like, and the plan is for it to be exportable. I'm not sure. I don't think at launch we're going to have a bulk export option, again, kind of similar to how transcripts are currently. But again, I don't want to say too much because I am not 100% sure where we have landed on some of that information.
There's a question we might need clarification on. Would all testing count towards our Seeklight quota?
Yeah, if you don't mind, do you mean like if you want to generate different alt text for the same image, for instance, to test? And in the meantime, I do also see a question about something like a yearbook. So that's a really good example of a complex image. So I should have mentioned this, I forgot, but the alt text is at the image file level, right? So if you have something like a compound object where you have multiple files, so for instance, if you have a yearbook where each page is its own image and you have that uploaded into one item record, there would be alt text for each page, right? So each image file will have its own alt text. For something like a yearbook, the alt text is going to be kind of high level, and then you'll need some of that additional image description, metadata, transcript to kind of flesh out the details more because it's too complex to describe a page of a yearbook in alt text, right? Um, so that is kind of where we would see that. If you are uploading an item like that as a PDF, I'm not 100% sure how, if I'll have to look into how Seeklight is going to handle images that are being uploaded as PDFs because we aren't going to be able to do like PDF remediation or anything like that. Um, Oh, good. Okay. So clarification on that testing for items that we might already have metadata for. So if you already generated metadata with Seeklight, the alt text is included in that allowance, the same as the transcript. So you'd be able to generate the alt text and the transcript for items that have already run through Seeklight. If it is an item that has not been uploaded or processed by Seeklight previously, then it would count as an item allowance. So same behavior as the transcripts. And I'm sure we will have much more granular details on that soon. And I think that also maybe answered the question about the alt text being included in the token. But let me know if I'm wrong about that. Yeah, so and again, once it's live, you are going to be able to, similar, exactly like transcripts, you'll be able to go back to your existing items and generate that alt text from the item page the way I did it in the demo. I don't believe you'll be able to do it in bulk. It'll sort of be item by item, but you can do that, and it'll be included in the allowance if the item was already run through Seeklight. But yeah, the way it's very similar to how we handle transcripts, that kind of model.
They talk about bulk processing.
Yes, yes, it is definitely a goal of ours for sure. Right. What other questions do folks have if they have any?
I am not seeing anything come in on the questions panel. We have a couple of minutes if anyone wants to type in any other questions. I don't think we missed anything in the chat. I think we covered everything.
Thank you. Okay, I do see a question about image descriptions in their own category. So Seeklight does not generate like a dedicated image description. I don't know if we have plans for that or not, although it's certainly interesting to think about. The image description that I demoed, I actually hand wrote based on I started with the description that Seeklight generated and then just sort of edited it and expanded it out. But I did do that manually, yeah. So that's kind of, you can kind of take, often Seeklight's descriptions do include some visual inventorying, so you can kind of use that as a starting point and expand it out if you need to. Thank you, Lee.
Yeah, thank you for all of these great questions. And Remus, do you want to reiterate that participants will receive a link to a video?
Yes, thank you. So participants will receive a link to the video of this recording. It'll also go in the handout, which I'll reshare. I see one last question about which level of compliance. So JSTOR uses, and including stewardship in that, uses WCAG 2.2 AA as our baseline. And that information is in our VPAT. So in the handout, there is a link to JSTOR's accessibility page, which includes both the JSTOR and the stewardship VPATs that you can reference, the ACRs. So that information is there, and I linked to that page because, as we continue to update the VPATs, the most recent version will always be on that accessibility at JSTOR page. I will also briefly call out that this just went live yesterday, but also on that handout is a longer page I wrote that breaks down recommendations for what accessibility materials you need by content. So images of text, but also PDF and AV, since we didn't have time to get into it in this webinar. So that is a resource that is available to you now. Alrighty, well, unless there are any last minute questions, thank you all so much for attending. And thank you, Matt and Elizabeth, for helping with the Q&A.
Of course. Thank you for leading this, Remus.
Yeah, thanks, Remus. This was great.
Okay. Well, it was good to see y'all. Definitely reach out if you have any additional questions, and we will get that handout updated with the recording and a Q&A by the end of the week, I believe, is my goal. So